Hi, and welcome to another how-to video from Empowered Networks. Today, we'll configure a DNS forwarding layer on an Infoblox grid. So what is a DNS forwarding layer? Or sometimes as it's called, a DNS caching layer? It's part of a multi-layer security and depth strategy. It serves as a buffer between your internal DNS and the dangers of the internet, protecting against types of denial of service attacks. It allows your internal DNS to continue to serve the all-important day-to-day functions should an attack occur. Infoblox allows both virtual and physical appliances. The configuration is the same. There are 4 simple steps to setting up a DNS forwarding layer. Step 1, add the forwarding layer to the grid. Step 2, license the appliances and have them join the grid. Step 3, configure the forwarding layer. Step 4, configure the internal DNS servers to use the forwarding layer. Now, let's begin. Okay, let's do step 1, add the forwarding appliances to the grid. As you can see, I am on the NIOS GUI, and what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to the grid tab, to the grid manager tab, and then make sure we're on the members screen. And what we see here is we have a grid manager, we have 2 internal name servers, we have not configured the forwarding servers yet, so let's add them. You hit the plus sign. I'm using virtual NIOS, so we'll click on that, and we will give it a fully qualified domain name. And we're going to use example.com as our domain. You use whatever your corporate domain is. Going next, we give it the IP addresses. Now, this is important that this is configured with the IP address that the client connects with. So in this case, we're going to use 145 for the first appliance, and we're going to use 144 for the second appliance. So add in the address, the gateway in octets, and then, of course, we're going to add the default gateway, which is going to be .20 in my case instead of .1. Do the next step, and if you look here, we have extensible attributes. These are custom attributes. If you have some, you can add them here. I don't have any, so I'm just going to save and close. Notice now that we've added the first one to the grid, so let's go add the second one to the grid, same way. Again, in my case, I'm a virtual NIOS, and I'm going to add the fully qualified domain name. All right. And actually, let's go back. I made a typo there. Forwarder 2. Let's go next. And I'm going to go here and add in my IP address. Note that if you had a high availability pair, you would actually set 5 addresses in here on the same subnet. But these are individual boxes. They're not high availability pairs. Adding in my gateway, and we don't have extensible attributes, so what we can do is we can just save and close at this point. Now, you'll notice both of these are connected to the grid. So this is step 1 done, and that would be adding the forwarding appliances to the grid. So stay tuned for step 2. Okay, step 2 is license the appliances and join them to the grid. So if we move over, we will see here we don't have any possibility of enabling DNS or DHCP because these appliances have not yet connected to the grid, and we don't know what they're actually licensed for. So until they do, at that point, they remain blank. To license the actual appliances, we actually have to go to the console, and moving over, we'll go to the console here, and you can see that I'm going to log in with the default credential set, which is admin Infoblox. That now moves us into here, and if I do a show license, what we'll see is we don't have any licenses configured. If you actually had a permanent license, what you could do is do a set license and actually paste that in. Since I don't have a permanent license for this example, I'm going to set a temporary 60-day license. This is not recommended, as when that 60-day license expires, you can no longer configure this and it will no longer actually serve. So you need a permanent license. So I'm going to select here, and we're going to add the temporary license for DNS, DHCP, and grid. The grid license actually allows it to connect to the grid. So here we are taking option 2. Going to acknowledge that. And now the next step is to tell it what type of appliance this is, which would be option 4. In my case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it to be an 825 appliance, but you can select whichever one you've actually purchased. So that's option 4, and then we're going to acknowledge that. And at this point, what will happen is the unit will actually go and reboot and configure itself as an 825. Let's go over to forwarder 2 and do the same thing. So again, we have the default credential set, and we are going to do a show license. And again, there's no licenses on here. Let's do a set temp license and option 2. And once again, we're going to now do option 4. Again, I want an 825, so I'm going to select this option 4 and acknowledge that. So again, this will reboot, and once it's rebooted, we'll have a configured 825 running DNS, DHCP, and with the grid license. Okay, we're on the console of forwarder 1, and we'll notice now that it has come up. And let's log back in. Again, the default credentials. And if we do a show license here, what we'll see is we now have DNS DHCP grid license, and you'll notice the model is an 825. So that's it for licensing the appliance. Well, now let's connect it to the grid. The easiest way to do that is do a set network. And it's going to prompt you for the address. So we're going to put in the address that we added when we configured these in the GUI, which in this case is 192.168.145. It will default to a mask that's based on the first octet, and we will have to change the default gateway. If your default gateway is 1, you could easily just take the default. We do not have any VLANs in my case, and we're not going to configure IPv6. So the next step is become a grid master. The best thing to do at this point is say no. And then we'll say this is correct. And again, it is correct. And this will now configure it with the IP address. The reason why we said no to the grid is we join the grid is we want to make sure it can actually connect to the grid master. Otherwise, we'll be waiting for at least, I think it's 2 attempts, and that's about 15 minutes. So the easiest way to find out if it's connected is we'll do a ping. So now we have to wait for it to restart, configure itself with the address. In the meantime, let's go over here to forwarder 2, and we'll do the exact same thing for forwarder 2. So again, default credential set. Right. Do a show license just to make sure we have these here. Come on. And again, DNS DHCP grid, and we have a model 825. So set network. Give it the IP address that we configured earlier in the GUI. And no to IPv6, and we'll say no to becoming a grid master, or sorry, joining your grid. So these will reset, and then once they're reset, we'll actually do a ping and then do what's called a set membership. Okay, the first forwarder has reset, and again, log back in using the default credentials. Okay, and let's do a ping. So in my case, my grid master is at 168.0.201, and we can see that it can connect to it. So we will cancel the ping, and now we will do a set membership. Okay, we put in the IP address of the grid master. It says VIP there because it assumes that it is an HA pair for the grid master. If it's not, you just put in the IP address of the LAN 1 interface. Okay, we now put in the grid name and then the shared secret. Note the shared secret is in plain text here, so you want to do this in a secure location. So we will tell it to join the grid, and then it will go off and start connecting to the grid. So let's check on our second box. Moving over, and you notice now we can log on it. Do a ping to make sure it can talk to the grid master. And again, we have a ping successful, so we'll stop there. And we will actually go do a set membership. Putting in the IP address of the grid master. Putting in the grid credentials. And have it join the grid. Back over here to the GUI. What we'll notice is both boxes are running. And if you remember, we now have our licenses, and it shows up here as being able to enable DHCP and DNS for both those boxes. So that's the end of step 2, license the appliances and join them to the grid. So our next step will be to configure the forwarding layer itself. The first step here would be to actually set up and run DNS on these 2 forwarding boxes. So we're going to move over from the member screen to the services screen, make sure DNS is clicked up here. We could also go to data management and go to DNS and do this, but it's probably easier just to do this. We're going to notice that forwarder 1 and forwarder 2 do not have DNS running. We will do a click here, and then we will start it up by hitting this play button. And we'll say, yes, proceed. And it may take a few minutes and start those services. So that's the first part in configuring these, and we'll wait while that comes up. The next part would be to go in and set up who is allowed to query it and what type of queries are allowed to go to these forwarders. Okay, we have our services running. So data management tab, DNS tab, and we're going to go down and we're going to make sure we're on the member servers screen. So what you want to do here is you want to configure the individual servers. You do not want to do a grid-wide setting. Otherwise, you'll set up all your appliances as forwarders. Okay, what we're going to do now is step 3, and that's finish configuring the forwarding layer. We've turned on DNS, so let's go ahead and edit our 2 forwarders. So I'm going to go in here and edit. I'm going to go to queries. And what I'm going to do is we're going to take a look here, and we can see we can allow queries from any or a named ACL or a set of ACEs. Also, we can allow recursion. Right now, these are defaulted to the grid properties for DNS, which is allow any, which is allow any. That's not a good idea for forwarders. We should lock them down. If you allow recursion for forwarders, you could actually participate in a DDoS vector attack where somebody reflects off of you and you issue a query or respond to a query back to something out on the internet. So it's very, very important to lock these down. The best way to do this is to actually go and set up a named access list. To do that, you go over to administration, you click on named ACLs. I've already got one set up here, but it's called allowed forwarders, but let's go edit that. And what you see here is we have allowed 0.201, that's the grid master, 10.201, that's name server 1, and 20.201, that's name server 3. So these are the only servers that will be allowed. to send queries to the forwarders. So again, back to data management, member server screen under DNS. And so let's go configure the forwarder itself. We'll go to queries and we'll go down here and we're going to override the grid settings. And we're going to say named ACL. We're going to say allowed forwarders. And we're going to go down here and we're going to override the recursion because we want to lock that down. Again, allow recursion because it's very possible that the internal name servers are requesting recursion on behalf of the client. And we're going to go in here and we're going to lock that down again to the allowed forwarders only. So we're going to do a save and close. Notice up here, the configuration services, we would need to restart. We're going to wait on that because we're also going to configure the second one. So again, to queries, go down here, override the grid settings. We want to override the grid settings. We don't want to change them because we want to do this on an individual basis. Otherwise, you will actually be setting up your entire grid to use this named ACL and basically turn these into forwarders. So we're going to override, allow recursion, use the named ACL. And there you have it, allowed forwarders. We're going to save and close. So now we can go in here and restart, but let's take a look and review the changes. If you look at the changes, it actually shows that there's 2 changes in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a restart. So now the daemon's restarting and applying those access lists right into that daemon. So that's the end of step 3, configuring the forwarding layer. Now we move on to step 4, which is configure the internal DNS to use the forwarding layer. At this point in time, the internal DNS servers are still going straight to the internet for any recursive lookups or anything that they're not authoritative for. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to edit these. And this time we're going to go to the forwarders setting. And we're going to take a look here and we're going to see that there is no data. So what you would normally do is click the override button. I already had, so I'm at the inherit. So we're going to add the servers. Unfortunately, there is no setting here for a named server group or an ACL. So we're going to add the devices that are allowed to query, we're going to add the devices that are the forwarders. So that's 145. And 144 are our 2 forwarders. Now, you can change the order of these by going up and down on the arrows. And the reason why is you may not want to overload one forwarder. You may want to different parts of your network. You may want to default to a different forwarder to take the queries first. But the other important part here is to click the use forwarders only. If you do not do that, this server, if it does not get a response from the forwarder, will go out to the internet and do a lookup, a recursive lookup to the root servers. We don't want that to happen. By clicking use forwarders only, we're forcing it to use the forwarders and forego doing a recursive server to the root. Again, save and close. And we're going to do that to the second one. Again, forwarders, override, add our 2 forwarders here. And I made a typo. Okay, and again, use forwarders only, save and close. Now, what we did is, again, we've added an access list to the daemon, so we need to restart what's affected. And if I go here and restart, that should go reset the daemons. So at this point, we've configured the internal DNS servers to use the forwarding layer. And all that's left to do is to test this to make sure it works. So I'm going to go down here, pop up my handy dandy terminal. I'm going to do a dig to 10.201. That's my internal name server number 1. It is authoritative for example2.com, a www, so this should actually resolve, and it does resolve to 10.10.1. So if we come over here and we do 20, it should also resolve, and there it does. So let's go try yahoo.com. All right. So what should happen here is that we will send it to the internal name server, 10.201, and that should then pass that on to the forwarding server. And you'll notice it did, that first initial refuse was actually, the daemon hadn't completely reset yet. So here we go. We're getting no errors, and we're going straight to yahoo.com. If I do google.com, we should get something very similar. And again, we do. So what's happening at this point is the internal name servers are going out and using the forwarding layer. The forwarding layer is doing a recursive lookup on our behalf directly to the root servers. And again, if I do google.com here on the other one, these are coming back quicker because they're actually coming from the cache of the forwarders. That's a good point to make, and that is the caching does occur on the forwarding layer, and that way it doesn't have to go out to the internet each time. All right, so that concludes setting up the cache forwarding layer. Thank you very much.